I almost missed the sign because my eyes kept closing between blinks. Rest area 1 mile. The green reflective letters flared in my headlights and vanished behind me. I'd been driving for 6 hours through a stretch of highway that seemed to have been forgotten by the rest of the country. No towns, no gas stations, no cell signal. Just dark forest pressing close on either side, the trees forming a jagged horizon against a moonless sky. I told myself I would only stop for 10 minutes. Just long enough to breathe. The air inside the car had gone stale and warm, thick with the faint plastic smell of the dashboard and the ghost of old coffee. The engine hummed steadily beneath my feet, a vibration I felt in my calves more than heard. The exit ramp curved away from the highway like a question mark. My headlights swept over reflective posts, a metal guardrail, and then open asphalt. The fog had begun to gather low to the ground, thin and silvery, curling at the edges of the ramp as if the earth were exhaling. Then I saw them. The lights. Tall poles rose from the lot ahead, each crowned with fluorescent panels that buzzed faintly, casting a sterile white glow over the pavement. They flickered, not dramatically, just enough to make the air look unstable. The illumination was too bright for this emptiness, too clean. It flattened everything. I exhaled in relief. At least it was lit. I pulled into the lot slowly, my headlights merging with the overhead glare. The asphalt was wide and newly painted, crisp white lines marking parking spaces in neat rows. A long lane curved around what should have been a building, a restroom block, vending machines, maybe a picnic shelter. But there was nothing. I drove forward another few yards before I understood. There were no structures, no bathrooms, no benches, no trash cans. No vending machines humming against concrete walls. Just an enormous, immaculate parking lot under perfectly functional lights. I stopped the car in the center of a space and left the engine running. The power lines overhead gave off a distant, insect-like hum. It layered with the fluorescent buzz, a thin electric whine that seemed to settle behind my eyes. Beyond the reach of the lights, the forest waited, black and absolute. Fog gathered at the treeline and slid slowly inward, as if testing the boundaries. I frowned at the empty expanse. Maybe the building had been torn down. That was the first explanation my mind offered. Renovations, construction, temporary closure. But if that were true, why leave the lights on? I turned off the engine. The sudden absence of vibration made the silence feel physical, like a pressure against my eardrums. The ticking of cooling metal echoed inside the car. Condensation had begun to form at the corners of the windshield, blurring the edge where glass met darkness. I stared at the place where a restroom building should have been. The pavement there was subtly different. Not broken, not patched, just smoother. The painted arrows that guided traffic curved around that central area, careful and deliberate, as though respecting a shape that no longer existed. Or had never existed. A thought slid in quietly. I had been here before. The idea felt absurd and immediate at the same time. I tried to place it, another late-night drive, another trip through this state. But I couldn't remember when. I only knew the sensation of pulling in, of expecting something to be there. I stepped out of the car. Cold air wrapped around me, damp and metallic. The fog brushed against my ankles. The lights flickered again, briefly dimming before returning to full brightness with a soft, synchronized pulse. My footsteps echoed too loudly. The acoustics were wrong. In a normal rest stop, sound broke against walls and overhangs. Here, the noise of my shoes on asphalt stretched out and came back thin, as if the lot were wider than it looked. I walked toward the center. The painted lines felt slightly raised beneath my soles, fresh and gritty. As I reached the open space where a building should have stood, the air grew warmer. Not much, just a degree or two. The lights above me hummed louder. I looked down. The asphalt was subtly warped here, not visibly uneven, but my balance shifted as though I were standing on something that had settled or swelled beneath the surface. I crouched and touched the ground. Felt smooth, too smooth, like stone worn by years of pressure. The fog curled around my hand and dispersed. I stood quickly, suddenly aware of the forest watching from the perimeter. The trees were motionless, but the darkness between them seemed textured, layered. My shadow stretched long and thin behind me, cast by multiple light sources at once. Except, I turned slowly. There were only 4 poles nearby. Yet I had more than 4 shadows. They overlapped faintly, some angled in directions that didn't correspond to any visible light. One of them lagged a fraction of a second behind my movement. I froze. The delayed shadow continued for another heartbeat before snapping into alignment. "No," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was denying. The lights flickered again, this time in a ripple that moved from the far end of the lot toward me. As the wave of dimness passed overhead, the fog seemed to rise higher, lifting from the ground in thin columns. In the brief half-dark, I thought I saw outlines. Walls, doorways, a rectangular shape where the building should have been, sketched in absence rather than substance. The suggestion of vending machines against an invisible wall. A bathroom sign hovering midair, white on green, unattached to anything. Then the lights steadied. The lot was empty again. My heart thudded painfully. I stepped backward, and my heel struck something solid. I spun. Nothing was there, but I had felt it. Curb. A low concrete edge. I reached behind me cautiously. My hand met resistance in midair, an obstruction that did not exist to the eye. I pressed harder. It was like pushing against thick glass. The surface curved gently, tracing the outline of what could only have been a wall. I staggered back, breath shallow. The building was still here. It just wasn't visible. The lights weren't illuminating an empty lot. They were illuminating something that had been erased incorrectly. A memory imposed on space. The hum overhead deepened, shifting pitch. The fluorescent panels brightened, bleaching the color from the world. My car looked distant now, smaller than it should have been. The fog gathered around the invisible structure, clinging to its unseen edges and revealing them in faint silver outlines. I could see the ghost of a doorway, and beyond it, movement, a shape inside the absent building pacing. Not solid, not shadow, just a distortion in the air, like heat rising from pavement. Paused at the threshold. The lights above me flickered violently, and for a split second the building was fully there. Concrete walls, dark windows, a vending machine glowing softly within. The door stood open. Inside, the shape resolved into a figure standing behind the counter that didn't exist. It looked like me, exhausted, hollow-eyed, one hand resting on the surface. Waiting. The lights snapped back to steady brightness. The building vanished. I stumbled toward my car, breath tearing at my throat. The asphalt beneath my feet felt subtly uneven now, dipping toward the center as though everything were sloping inward. As I reached the driver's door, I glanced back. My car's shadow stretched toward the invisible structure. And it didn't stop at the boundary of light. It continued across the empty space and climbed an outline I could not see, bending at right angles, conforming to walls that weren't there. The shadow of my car was parked inside the building. The overhead lights dimmed in unison. In the growing dark, the lot no longer looked flat. It bulged slightly at the center, as if something beneath the asphalt were pressing upward, testing the surface. The lights weren't on for travelers. They were on to define the edges, to keep whatever was here contained within a perimeter of brightness. I fumbled with my keys and threw myself into the driver's seat. As I slammed the door, the hum outside dropped into a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the chassis. The fog surged forward, swallowing the painted lines. Through the windshield, I saw the building again, fully formed now, solid and ordinary. Fluorescent lights glowed inside. A restroom sign hung over the entrance. A vending machine flickered patiently in the corner. And through the glass door, I saw myself standing there, hand raised as if to knock. The overhead lights went out. All of them. The lot fell into absolute darkness. But the building remained lit from within. I sat frozen, staring at my own figure inside that impossible rest stop. It tilted its head slightly, as though listening. Then it stepped back into the interior and disappeared down a hallway that had no end. A moment later, The overhead lights outside snapped back on. The building was gone. The lot was empty. My dashboard clock blinked 3:17 a.m., though I was certain it had been just after 2 when I exited the highway. The sign at the far end of the lot flickered to life. Rest area open. Below it, in smaller letters I didn't remember seeing before, next stop, 0 miles. The arrow pointed nowhere. I turned the key, but the engine didn't respond. Outside, the lights hummed steadily, waiting for the next car. I first saw them in the thin film of glare hovering over the glass. It was just after midnight, and the highway had narrowed into a 2-lane road cutting through marshland. Fog clung low over the asphalt, shifting in slow currents as my headlights pushed through it. The beams caught the mist and turned it into a glowing tunnel, a pale corridor with no walls. Beyond it, there was nothing. No houses, no other cars, no lights except my own. Inside the car, everything felt insulated and small. The dashboard cast a soft blue glow over my hands. The radio was off, but the speakers emitted a faint, empty hiss, like they were waiting for a signal. The tires made a steady shushing sound against damp pavement. Occasionally, the chassis rattled when I hit uneven patches in the road. I was alone. I had been alone since I left the last gas station an hour ago. A place so deserted I had to knock on the attendant's window to wake him. I remember checking the passenger seat before I pulled away. A habit, maybe, making sure my bag was still there, making sure no one had approached the car without me noticing. The seat had been empty. Now, in the windshield's reflection, it wasn't. The glass held a faint mirror image of the interior, superimposed over the road ahead. My face floated over the fog. My hands rested on the wheel, and in the passenger seat, half formed in the glow, sat someone else. At first, I thought it was just distortion. Reflections bend at night. Shadows fold in strange ways. The fog refracts light, and the windshield becomes a screen where the outside and inside overlap. I blinked, and the shape shifted slightly, as if correcting itself. A shoulder. A head turned slightly toward me. I didn't look at the seat right away. I kept my eyes on the road and watched the reflection instead, as though it were safer to see it indirectly. The figure was facing forward. Its outline was soft, almost blurred, as if it were seated just beyond the focal range of the glass. I told myself it was the headrest, the angle of the seatbelt, my coat thrown over the back. Slowly, carefully, I turned my head. The passenger seat was empty. The fabric was undisturbed. The seatbelt hung straight. My bag rested against the door, exactly where I had left it. My pulse climbed, but I forced a breath out through my nose. When I looked back at the windshield, the figure was still there. Only now it had turned its head slightly toward me. I felt the movement rather than saw it. The reflection shifted with a deliberateness that didn't match the sway of the car. Its chin angled in my direction, as if studying me. My hands tightened on the wheel. "This is exhaustion," I muttered, my voice sounding too loud in the enclosed space. The dashboard clock read 12:47 a.m. I'd been driving since sunset. Long days and longer roads can distort perception. I'd read that somewhere about microdreams, about the brain projecting shapes into shadows. I checked the seat again. Empty. I adjusted the rearview mirror, angling it downward slightly, thinking maybe the perspective would change whatever illusion was forming. The mirror caught my eyes, and, behind me, the back seat. Empty. I looked forward again. The reflection remained. It had straightened in the seat. Its posture mirrored mine exactly now. Shoulders squared, hands resting on invisible knees. Except its face was wrong. Not grotesque, not damaged, just unfocused. The features seemed to blur at the edges, as though the glass refused to render them clearly. Passing headlights from a distant car on the opposite side of the marsh flickered through the fog and skimmed across my windshield. For a second, the interior brightened, washing out the reflection. When the light passed, the figure's head was tilted. It was no longer looking at the road. It was looking directly at me. I jerked my gaze to the seat again. Still empty. The realization came in slow layers. If I were hallucinating, the image would disappear when I looked directly at it. Or it would remain consistent. It wouldn't respond. This was responding. The fog thickened. My headlights seemed weaker now, swallowed sooner by the mist. The road markings appeared and vanished beneath the beams like bones under shallow water. I became aware of another sound beneath the tires' hiss. Breathing. Not mine. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the engine, but it had a rhythm that wasn't synchronized with my own. Slightly slower, slightly deeper. I held my breath. The other breathing continued. My chest tightened painfully before I had to inhale again. In the windshield, the figure's chest rose and fell in time with the second rhythm. I felt a memory trying to surface. Something about picking someone up, a hitchhiker, a figure at the side of the road before the marsh began. Had I stopped? Had I opened the door? The thought lodged in my mind like a splinter. I tried to replay the last hour. Gas station. Empty road. Fog. But there was a gap. A thin, unaccounted-for stretch of time between the station and the marsh. The reflection smiled. It wasn't wide or exaggerated. Just a small, knowing curve of the lips. The features sharpened slightly, resolving into something more distinct. It looked like me. Not perfectly. The eyes were darker, the expression calmer. But the resemblance was undeniable. As if the windshield were showing a delayed version of myself from a different angle. I swallowed. "I didn't pick you up," I whispered. The reflected mouth moved a fraction of a second after mine. I hadn't spoken. The breathing grew louder. The figure leaned closer to the center console. Its shoulder encroached into the space between us in the reflection. I could see the outline of its hand resting near the gearshift. The actual seat beside me remained empty, yet the car felt heavier. The steering wheel resisted slightly when I adjusted it. The engine strained on a slight incline that I didn't remember approaching. Another set of headlights appeared ahead, cutting through the fog from the opposite direction. As they passed, their glare flared across the windshield, momentarily erasing the interior reflection. In that bright wash, I saw only the road, only myself. Relief flooded me. The car passed. The darkness returned. The reflection came back wrong. Now only one figure sat in the driver's seat. The passenger side was empty. The person behind the wheel in the windshield was not me. They gripped the steering wheel with steady, familiar hands. Their posture was relaxed, confident. Their face was fully formed now. My face, but clearer, less strained. And I was sitting in the passenger seat. In the reflection, my body was angled slightly toward the driver, watching. I snapped my head toward the seat beside me. It was still empty. But when I looked back at the windshield, I was no longer holding the wheel. The other version of me was. Its eyes flicked sideways, meeting mine through the glass. It smiled again. The breathing in the car synchronized, one rhythm becoming two, then merging into a single steady inhale and exhale. My hands felt numb against the wheel. Slowly, carefully, I tried to lift them. They didn't move. The car continued forward at a constant speed, perfectly centered in the lane. In the windshield, the other me adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, as though ensuring a clear view of me. I realized then that the reflection hadn't been showing a passenger. It had been showing a replacement. Something that only existed in surfaces and angles, in the thin barrier between inside and out. It had needed the glass, the darkness, the overlap of worlds to take shape. And now it didn't need the passenger seat. It had the driver's. The fog ahead parted unnaturally, forming a straight, narrow corridor. In the windshield, I watched it, lean closer to the glass from the driver's side, studying me with detached curiosity. I felt the faintest shift in weight, as though the car's center of gravity had moved a few inches to the right. Outside, the road curved gently. Inside, my reflection did not follow, kept the wheel steady, guiding the car straight toward the thickest part of the fog. The last thing I saw clearly was my own face in the windshield, calm and focused, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then the fog swallowed the road entirely, and I no longer knew which side of the glass I was on.